Okay, so good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on where it is that you are calling in from. Already seeing some responses to the questions that I asked before. Anyone who did not yet respond, feel free to do so at your earliest opportunity. We are so excited to have you here for today's webinar, which you probably have already picked up is a little different than the ones that I've been running on my own. This is actually the second webinar where I've had the opportunity to bring in an expert to talk with me, talk with us about a topic that is, I think, of great importance to our community, both as teachers or educators, as well as parents. So many of you probably are dealing with it with children in your own house, as well as with your own with your students. And so we're going to try to hit on this in many ways as possible. So if you can, please tell us, number one, what your name is or where you're from in particular, whether you are new or returning, as well as what your biggest pain point is specific to anxiety, the thing that drew you to this conversation. I am noticing that most of you are replying to all panelists and attendees, which is exactly what you should be doing. For the handful of you that are only replying all panelists, please change the feature in your chat. At the bottom there's a drop down, click on it and choose all panelists and attendees. And if you already replied, but just to me and Etti, please go ahead and reply again so that everybody sees you, everybody knows where you're from, and we can kind of build this community and this conversation together. So one person, Teresa, is asking for some insight on emotional disorder. Sarah is talking about anxiety levels rising, students being more anxious. Danielle is discussing students refusing to do work based on anxiety. These are real issues. And so we're going to try to unpack as much as we can. Obviously, we have a prepared presentation. This is Etti's content. She is really, really good at what she does. And so I want to make sure that she has all the time that she needs to be able to present this content to you. I will be back on the back end, the last few minutes, to wrap up the conversation and make sure that we hit on it. We want to make sure that we have clear objectives. We're going to share those with you shortly. So be mindful of them so that you can respond to them, answer questions, and or minimally say, yes, I got this, or no, I did not get this. And then I have a couple of public service announcements on the back end, including information about upcoming webinars. So at this point, I will mute myself and mute my camera as well. Etti, the floor is yours, and please take us through this very important conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. I do have to tell you that it's an honor to be here, and this is a workshop that actually I prepared for a school requesting it before the coronavirus. There was a lot of anxiety about the anxiety that children were having, and so you don't really need to know much about me, and I'm happy to at the end put this up again if you need. But I have a lot of experience in schools. I was a school teacher for many years, and now I work for an organization that sends me into classrooms, and I teach teachers, and I mentor teachers, and I observe them, and I model for them, and I get to really get close to a lot of really special principals and teachers, and it's just a joy. So thank you so much for having me, Rabbi Mr. Naftali Haff, and we're going to go on. Okay, so students' anxiety. Our objectives today is to define anxiety in ourselves so we can better define anxiety in children, to be aware of red flags that indicate a child experiencing anxiety, and to add tools in our toolkit. Wouldn't it be nice if you had hands-on strategies so that you can prevent instead of always react to the anxiety that you're seeing? And by the end of the workshop, I'm assuming that we're going to be able to say, yes, we were successful because we can prevent most anxiety in the classroom rather than react once we recognize it. And we can teach our students to recognize what anxiety feels like. If they know what it feels like, then they can use the tools we give them to lessen the feeling. So that's the goals of today. And what does anxiety look and feel like? Well, we're living in very interesting times. We're all very, very anxious as adults. We're dealing with uncertainty. We don't know what's going on. People are losing their jobs, and we're dealing with teaching that just is not natural. We're teaching through Zoom and teleconferencing. It's just not the way we all said we're going to teach. In fact, I remember clearly telling my parents, I am not the kind of person who sits by a computer. I want to be a teacher because I need people, I need an audience, I want to impart knowledge, and here I am sitting by a computer. So I know you feel the same way, but it's interesting to note that we have anxiety, and not always do our children have the same anxiety. So we're going to talk about the difference. But something to think about, something that upset you. What was your reaction? What were you feeling? What did you look like? What did you sound like? It's important to recognize how you feel and what you do when something upsets you, so that you're more able to recognize your students and how they're feeling and what they're doing. So a lot of people told me that when they're upset, they they feel upset or they get frozen in place. They also say that what were they feeling? They were feeling in their actual bodies rising muscle tension. They were feeling anger. Their heartbeat was going fast. They felt red in their face. Their heat was actually rising, which is why we get red. They felt stomach pain and they were sweating. And you know what? When they had to think about how they looked, they told me they had clenched hands or angry faces. They had red faces. Their pupils were dilated. And when I asked what they sounded like, the answers were shrill and loud. And some people said they just froze and they couldn't talk at all, or they were hoarse. And this is actually something that really happens. And the reason we feel anxiety is because of our belief system. Since we're little, we just have labels that were given to us or labels we gave ourselves. For example, I still remember in 10th grade, may she live and be well, my teacher held up my math test and said, besides Etti, everybody else did very well on the math test. And you know what that did to me? That reinforced that not only was I weak in math, but I couldn't do math. And so because of the label that was given to me, it was only a few years ago that I tackled math again. And you know what? I'm still not so great at math, but at least I'm not unable to do math. So that was a belief system I had to think about and tackle because it caused me anxiety. And it was a label someone reinforced, kind of a label I gave myself, but one that was given to me, reinforcing the label. Learned helplessness. You have to think about the fact that a lot of times we're living in a society where moms and dads jump in to do for the kids. Our parents might have jumped in to do for us. So if we never did something, then we decide that we can't do that thing. And then it causes us anxiety when we have to. Imagine taxes. For me, the idea that I have to do my own taxes is very stressful, which is why I don't. I avoid that anxiety. So it's very important to think about the fact that as adults, we can avoid anxiety if we are able to. Sometimes we can't, but we try. But children are really not given that option. And of course, the fear of the unknown, which is what we're in right now. What's going to be, when are schools going to open? When is life going to return to normal? And when it does, will the virus still hit people? So these are the kind of things that we have to think about so that we can then help children when we understand anxiety in the first place. And we need to know that our bodies go into fight or flight response. There actually are physical manifestations of the way we feel. And so we're not going to go through every one of these because I think we all are here for the toolbox. We all want to know the hands-on tricks and tips. But meanwhile, just to understand that we really feel ill when we're feeling anxious. And the CDC does say that 7.1% of children do have diagnosed anxiety. So think about all the kids in my class that weren't diagnosed who also display anxiety. Okay, so the numbers definitely are a little bit higher. Now, let's not confuse this with depression, but please know that definitely some children who have anxiety also have depression. So from the 7.1% of children, there also are 73% of those 7.1% children that also suffer from depression. And of course, 1 and 2 have behavior problems. Well, if you're anxious, you don't want to be there. If you don't want to be there, then you're in survival mode. And if you're in survival mode, you just try to misbehave so the teacher gets rid of you and then you are not anxious any longer. So it's something to think about. Now, before we go on, let's just stop for a second. Stress is good. Stress is a motivator. Stress makes me do my best, but that's only if I'm smart about the stress. That's only if I realize that it helps me get optimal if it's not too much stress. If we have low stress, the teacher is boring, life is not motivating, nothing's happening for me, then I'm bored. I might even be depressed. If I can increase my interest and I get into what I'm doing, then I have optimal performance. But if there's too much anxiety, if it's too much and I can't take it, I'm going to have a complete meltdown. So it is very important to realize we want enough stress that motivates, but not too much stress that is actually a problem and prevents motivation and causes anxiety. So before we continue, I just have to share with you that I am on the phone with principals and with teachers, and I've been busy being on the phone with them a lot recently. And we've discovered something fascinating. Adults seem to be much more anxious right now, but children fall in three categories. There are the children who basically miss school, miss their friends, but you know what? They're okay. They're finding ways to keep busy. They're in healthy families, and they're just doing fine. And when the schools open up, they'll go back into school and it will be okay. Then you have children on the extreme spectrum of they love this. They don't have any anxiety because the problem with school is peer pressure anxiety, it's academic anxiety, it's all this stuff that by being home, they no longer suffer from. So they really like this and they hope they always could stay home. And that's probably that 7 point whatever 1 or 3%. And then you have the people on the opposite end of the spectrum. And those are the ones we're most anxious about. We're thinking about the ones who we recognized when we were in school. The children who are coming from neglect, they're not being taken care of, they're not getting food, they're not getting care. There's a lot of children and a lot of noise, there's mess, laundry's not being done, food is not coming out at the right time. And then we have the families who were doing very well, but now the parents lost their jobs, they're frustrated, they're anxious. It's hard for children to be around anxious adults. So just be aware that what I'm about to show you is really was created much more for the classroom situation. And then we can discuss during we can stop and have Naftali read us some of your questions and some of your comments to make sure that we're hitting all the things you're worried about, because this is really for back to school.
Etty,
Because we're in a very
before you
different.
continue, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. I do want to actually make a note that I am trying to continue the conversation in the chat so that everybody should continue to be mindful of that, even if Etty doesn't direct you there. But separate from that, I was wondering if everybody just wanted to weigh in for a moment on the anxiety that you are personally feeling right now, if you feel comfortable, but minimally the kind of anxiety your students are expressing or that your parents of students are expressing. What does that look like in your situation? And if you have tips, I know Etty's going to share a boatload of tips as well, and that's why we brought her here. But if there's anything that you are using, that would be great, because we want to make this not only very interactive, but we want to learn from the proverbial boots on the ground. We want to see what our very best educators are doing to help in a situation which is uncomfortable minimally, and for most of us, deeply disruptive. So I'm going to mute again, but before we
Please
continue,
don't
let's
mute.
all use the chat in a way that's going to help us learn from each other and kind of create, like I said, community and support around the problems that we are experiencing. So what do you see
Okay.
and how are you responding?
So I just want to share with you that I can't see the chat. I'm feeling a little left out. So I really like interactive workshops, and this is very difficult for me. So if you could share some people's chats before we continue, that would be very, very helpful.
Okay, I will do that. I'm not quite sure why you're not seeing it. So maybe you could look around at the base while I'm talking and see if there's any way you could access it. Maybe hover over, because usually I have no problem accessing it. In the meantime, Amelia has written that the parents are worried that their child will not be ready for first grade. I'm assuming she's a preschool teacher. That's the only response I've seen so far. I'm sure that more are coming. But Etty, if you click on the chat, will it not open up for you?
It just won't. Okay, so let's just answer Amelia. This is very unprecedented times. Whenever we do anything, whenever we make some sort of presentation or we make a decision to bring in Common Core, and I hear you're groaning, whenever there's a decision made, it's years in the process. And what everybody needs to understand, and we need to help parents understand, is this just happens and there was no prep time. So everybody has to realize that when we get back into school, the teachers are going to have to, with the principal's help, pick up the pieces. We're going to have to reassess what our curriculum is going to look like. We're going to have to work with the students in front of us a little differently than we worked with them before. They're definitely going to come in behind. We can also help parents by telling them about different access to different wonderful things out there, like, for example, Khan Academy for Kids. That's really a fantastic way of children who are emerging readers to practice reading. If you look up online interactive games, there's a lot of educational math and spelling educational forums that you can join, and they're all made for your little children, for your class, the parents, for their children, to remember that there's been homeschooling now for a long time, so there's a lot of resources that we can tap into. So we need to help parents take a deep breath and realize that school will resume, and when it does, teachers are going to be those heroes and figure out where the deficit is and how we can help. So Amelia, I hope that helped and that answered your question.
Etti, thank you. And before you continue, if I may just quickly, number one, I did not, actually, there is another one that just came through from Laura. Laura says, I have parents assuming their children are struggling, but when I talk to them, they are fine. Also, parents who are unable to get their children to complete work, and parents who are unresponsive when teachers and school personnel reach out. So it sounds like Laura is dealing with two extremes. Some parents that are very much on top of things and their situation is great. Some situations which are more complicated and probably very difficult to manage remotely, but I'm sure Laura and everybody else is trying their best. And then Therese wrote, children will come back with different behaviors. As a kinder teacher in first grade, this worries me a little. Do you want to respond to that before we move forward?
Absolutely. So Laura, I'm just going to tell you that parents aren't teachers, so they have really no good way of assessing. So you just want to, again, remind them that you're monitoring the progress, and when class resumes, the children will be helped. And right now, from what you're seeing, they're doing okay, and they could go ahead again to Khan Academy Kids or anything like that, and they can definitely be on such a program, because that program will advance the child when the child knows information without any outside bias as a parent might have, or as a parent might think the teacher has. And in terms of the teacher, I think Therese, who said that she is a kinder teacher, there are going to be behaviors. But the good news is, something that we know from education is a behavior can happen in another classroom. And when the child enters your classroom with your organization and your rules and procedures, they are so grateful for the structure and they go right into your method of teaching. And it's true, they still might have some behaviors, but the more structured you walk into that classroom when we open again, and the more you are warm and clear and organized, which we're going to discuss in this workshop, the more you can be sure that at least in your classroom, you're not going to have those misbehaviors. So
Etti, so if I
let's move
can,
on.
at this point, let's move on. We have a few other responses. We have from Kim and from Sarah, and Danielle commented additionally. I think at this point, we're going to wait. Ladies, if you don't mind, I apologize, but I just want to make sure that Etti can complete her prepared comments. Hopefully, a lot of what you were describing will be addressed, and please make a note of it so that we could circle back as appropriate on the back end.
Okay, here we go. So the first thing we want to know, we want to think about when we get back into school is look for red flags, but don't diagnose. We are not doctors. So we don't want to say, the child has this problem or the child's suffering from this problem. What we do want to say is, okay, I'm the eyes on the problem. Is there a behavior change? Is there an IEP? I have dealt with so many teachers who didn't realize to check the IEP, and when they saw the IEP, which is an individual educational program made for that specific child, and they saw what was suggested and they did it, it helped. So behavior change might be something that's a reaction to stress at home. It might be something that changed and won't get better. Our job is to monitor, not to diagnose. And once we keep an anecdotal record, and once we write down what we're seeing, we're then able to go to the proper people and say, help, and here's what we need to help with. And the more information we can give, the clearer we will be able to able to get that child help. So that's what we're looking for. The next thing is we want to know if there's somatic complaints. Often we worry about children who complain of headaches or stomach aches or nausea or heart palpitations. My head is light, this hurts me, that hurts me, and there's no medical underlying cause. And that often tells us there's something bothering the child and they don't even realize it. Little children, and I've seen seventh and eighth graders as well, are complaining about something and don't realize why they're complaining about it. They might want to go to the bathroom or go to the nurse's office often. So any avoidance is telling you something. Any pain might be telling you something. So it's something to think about. At the same time, it makes me laugh to think about the time when I was teaching and this child was falling asleep in my class. Now, I am pretty mellow right now on this webinar, but I'm pretty not mellow in the classroom. And I'm jumping around, I'm exciting, and this child is falling asleep. And I went ahead and I called the mom and I just said, hi, I'm just concerned. Sarah seems really tired. And she said, oh, I got to check into that. We just moved the baby's crib into her room so I could sleep at night. I wonder if she's waking her up. And it turns out, yep, Sarah was getting up 3 or 4 times a night to stick the pacifier in the baby's mouth. So an 8-year-old, because I think at that time I was teaching 3rd grade, an 8-year-old was not having a good night's sleep and waking up constantly to put the pacifier in. So that was not anything to do with anxiety. It was plain tiredness. So that's what I mean by don't diagnose. Keep a list of what we're noticing, what you see, and then you can go ahead and do some research because we are detectives. That's what we do. Also, is there distorted cognition? Anxious children might be very into perfection and need constant reassurance. They also go ahead and dramatize, like, she never calls on me, or I failed, or no one likes me. And the sad part about that is you keep a record and you see you call on that child. And you see that she got an 89 on a really hard test and she did really well, but she thinks that she did so badly. Or this boy is walking around saying, no one likes me. And distorted cognition gets more and more distorted. And actually, this is where task force come in to monitor children and make sure that we don't end up with anxiety turning into something like, God forbid, a mass shooting. Because these are all things that tie up together, which is why we are the eyes in the classroom and we want to notice distorted cognition. We want to notice avoidance tactics. We want to notice a child who just doesn't work, doesn't participate, put their heads down, go out often, shut down. And if we see that they're not doing it by literature and they are doing it by math, well, maybe they don't want to be in math class. Maybe that's causing them stomach aches. Maybe that's bothering them. Kids are great at survival. They might not be the smartest children in your classroom, but they're really smart. So avoidance is a big red flag that says, hey, child's anxious about this learning. And we need to understand the brain. When we're teaching children, they're in the learning thinking part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And that's where you make decisions and you solve a math problem. But when we go into survival mode, which is fight, flight, or freeze, then we move into the limbic system. And the limbic system is where the animal functions from. And that's a car coming at me, I'm running, bear coming at me, I'm jumping up a tree. So we as adults with the same mammal limbic system, when we move into the limbic system, we no longer can make the choices. So we teachers have to be careful because a child who moves into the limbic system is not making decisions. It's throwing things, is screaming, is acting really like they're in pain. And we're like, sit down right now. This is not the behavior I accept, but we're talking to someone in animal mode. So we really have to give them a way to move back into the learning thinking part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And we'll discuss good ways of doing that later on in this workshop. So it's really important to just realize anxious children are not thinking from the best part of their brain. So what's the first thing we need to do as teachers? We need to make sure that we recognize that unstructured or uncontrolled time is anxiety producing. A lot of the teachers I work with, I'm asking them on their Zoom training, on their Zoom teaching, on their calls, to remind children to find a quiet place. And you know what? Some people have found closets a very quiet place. When you're quarantined and you're in a small house with a lot of people, a closet works. The point is, you want to make sure that it's quiet and it's okay to work there. The next thing we want to make sure children have is structure. So I really beg teachers to go ahead and even now on the long distance remote learning to say, here's what we're going to do today. The same way in a classroom we write it on the board, we should be saying it and possibly putting up that slide of what we're planning to do today. What's our objective? What are we doing? What supplies do we need? And children are able to breathe and say, okay, this is happening. Okay. And for some children, they just say, I don't want to go on. And that's also good for them. So we're really seeing that as if teachers try to replicate the classroom a little bit, it really helps. Share thoughts and information before giving something out. You know, it's funny, there's some anxiety about being called on a Zoom class right now. And that's because if a teacher says, okay, Darren, what's 3 plus 3? Darren has to do two things. He has to say, I was called on for 3 plus 3. And I also have to unmute myself. And that's a lot of steps. So it's better to say, I'm going to call on Darren now. Darren, you're going to unmute yourself. And here's the problem I'm going to ask you to answer. Darren, and then call on Darren. Or the next thing to do is to say, I need to know the answer of 3 plus 3. Darren, I'm going to ask you to answer 3 plus 3. So please unmute yourself. And everybody, let's all think. What's the question we're giving Darren? 3 plus 3. By that point, Darren has found the unmute button. In an older classroom, we're going to just make sure we're clear and we give the children time to work on problems. And then we're clear about coming back together and sharing answers and working them through. Clarity is everything and reduces anxiety. Oh, wrong way, sorry about that. Make it manageable. In the classroom, which means also on the Zoom calls or on the Google Classroom or any other tool that you're using for remote learning. But let's go back to the classroom, which we're most comfortable with. In the classroom, we have to use the gradual release of responsibility model. So often, I'm in a classroom and the kids are anxious and there's misbehavior. And when I show the teacher this, she's like, oh, I'm missing the middle, right? And that's the answer. She's missing the middle. We have to make sure we teach. I have the information and I'm going to share it. So I'm going to do it. I'm giving the focus lesson. Then we have to make sure there's guided instruction time where I have the children working with me to tackle the information. So you see that the triangle is going down and I'm still having some of the responsibility, but I'm starting to give it over to the children. And so they have some of the responsibility, I have some of the responsibility, and they're starting to understand. Finally, it's collaborative. Now I can put them in pairs. And if you're using Zoom, you can put them into breakout rooms. And now I can have children working on the problems together. And the reason I keep going to math is just because it's a skill-based lesson. You don't find anxiety in not skill-based lessons as much, except if a child doesn't know what page you're on. You really find skill-based lessons the focal point of all the anxious behavior that we see in the classroom. So if we go from teacher responsibility where she or he is teaching the material, making it clear, then guiding the children to do it with the teacher, and finally walking around and checking on the children while they attempt it, finally they can do independent work. And that makes a big difference. It makes things calmer, and the children can then do it without thinking that they're missing something or they're stupid, which is another key for, oh, I'm getting anxious. So we really have to make sure we do these levels when we teach. We want to break instruction into steps. I really, especially now, remote learning is just not the same as being in person. We want to make sure we give instructions in small little increments. We want to make sure we say it and then we say it again a different way. Okay, everybody, please open up your purple reading log. Okay, you're all holding your notebooks, the purple notebooks. I just said the same thing twice, but I said it different ways, so it kept it a little bit more interesting. We want to make sure to cover as many questions as we know will come up before they're being asked. Because you know what? We taught already 2/3 of the year. And even during those 2/3, you get to know the students and you know what they're going to ask. So answer the questions before they're being asked. You know, as you prepare, what you need to break up, where the kids are going to get stuck, and make sure that you unstuck them before they get stuck. Unstick them, unstuck them. Anyway, next. And have weekly reminders for accountability. I teach college, and they're supposed to be adults, but you know what? I understand that they're juggling a lot of other classes too, and a lot of other things in life. They pretty much all have jobs. They all have things, whether they're married and have their own families, whether they're part of a family, whether they're living alone. Everybody's got their stuff. So I send emails, a reminder email every week, because it's just a way of making a connection and lessening anxiety. So I'll send messages. When I taught fifth grade, seventh and eighth grade, and whenever I assigned a project, let's say I would say the project is due June 12th. Well, then every week, a certain day, I gave out a paper and they had to fill out what was due and what they've done so far. And you know what? Many times the answer was, I did nothing so far. And they got 5 points for filling out that paper. That paper reminded them that we have to break our project into smaller increments, and that there is a project coming up. If I don't do that, and I have children very anxious the week before, the night before, not sleeping, falling apart, and then not bringing their thing in on time, or bringing it on time and having parents pretty mad. So it's something to think about. Keep self-regulation. Anxiety can threaten to take over the brain. So we need to make sure to engage the brain, which is what I was talking about before. We need to teach self-regulation. So we need to remind ourselves that when a child doesn't do well in math, we teach it to them. When a child can't read well, we tutor them. If the chat was open for me, I would see you saying when a child can't behave well, and unfortunately with the teachers I work with, it used to be we kick them out. But how can they learn self-regulation if they're standing in the hallway or if they're standing in the office? So what we need to do is we need to teach them how to behave. We need to teach them how to self-regulate. I know that when I'm upset, if I just pick up anything, it could be a cereal box, it could be a paper, and I just read it, I move my limbic system brain that's in action. I make it move over to my prefrontal cortex, and now I'm busy thinking about what I'm reading. My heart rate slows down, I get less upset, and then I can totally be back in the situation, but not be so anxious and upset. And that's what we need to teach children. So we need to remember that just kicking them out or just screaming at them, it's not helpful. And we need to think of how we can help them be better people, just like we help them read or learn math.
Etty, if I could
So
jump in
what
for
are the
just a
physical?
moment, if you don't mind
Yes,
going back to the
please.
previous slide for just a second. So we have been relatively quiet on the chat thus far. There are some things that I texted to you previously. You might want to take a look at it while I'm talking if you wanted to see what people have been describing. But in the
Okay.
interim, I just wanted to ask everybody who is here, is there anything that you are already doing with your students or perhaps noticing your students doing on their own that would be examples of self-regulation? And oftentimes, as I've talked about with mindset and some of the other things we've been talking about on these webinars, sometimes we just need to demystify the things that are already happening. Because sometimes our students know, our parents know, we know as professionals that certain behaviors produce results, but we don't necessarily have a name for it. We don't necessarily have a scientific or systematic process for it. But if we shine the light on it in the right way, we could oftentimes help students self-regulate before matters escalate. So if anybody wants to weigh in on the comments in that specific regard, I'll be more than happy to share them as I see them populate.
Well, I just want to share something that's like bringing me to tears. Kim wrote, I'm a middle school counselor. Lots of loss around my school district. Parents are worried about food, jobs, health. And I call to make sure that their needs met, basic needs right now. And just calling is helpful. So we all have to remember that, like, our children are people. And yeah, we have to reach out to the parents who affect how the children's day is going. And just by calling and the parents know they're not alone, they are just less anxious. Connecting to families helps us all. I assure them things will be okay. And we have to take things one day at a time for right now. That is amazing, Kim. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Naftali, for texting me all the chats. It's true that Danielle is saying we have parents who don't know how to go about teaching their children, and therefore get angry or upset with their children, and they're getting on the phone calls and they're yelling. So it might be helpful, Danielle, if we call the parents at night and say, you know what, let's make sure that I have the ability to calm your children down and teach them. And maybe you can think of other things like, and it's on my brain right now, so I'm going to say Khan Academy for Kids, just because I keep seeing kids use it. But there are other wonderful, wonderful sites. At the end, I'm going to try to pull them up for you and be able to tell them to you. But we can give these things to parents who, why should the kids be on screen time that's not helpful when they could be on something that's academic and calming parents down? Parents want their kids to learn. They want them to be okay, and they want them to be able to be smart and be, self-made people and get good jobs. And this is scaring them. So when they get anxious, they might not behave the way we want them to. So we really want to make sure that we are offering that to parents. We should be a resource, not just a teacher. And Amelia, yeah, they might not be ready for first grade. And so we're going to have to, in first grade, work a lot harder. Like really, but we're lucky because we have all these ways of teaching ESL and everything else for children who are not ready for first grade. And we might have to just borrow some of that. And we have somebody who's nervous that children won't want to come back to school. Well, we're going to have to be creative and make them want to. So thank you for that. And please stop me and discuss
Etty,
chats whenever
may
you
I
want
mention
to.
one other thing, if that's okay?
Sure.
I think everybody also needs to remember that parents don't know what's normal. They don't know, I don't mean that in the wrong way, but I mean to say they don't have a benchmark necessarily by which to measure how their students, their children's responsiveness, their levels of anxiety, different things measure up against their peers because they don't have that picture. And so oftentimes what we as teachers need to be doing is to calm parents down, let them know that their children's progress is acceptable, is appropriate, that they have the situation under control, that the school has a plan. We don't necessarily have to articulate all of that, but if they genuinely feel that we as the professionals are taking the bull by the horns and we have a way by which to ensure that their children will meet all of their benchmarks and that they are doing fine considering the circumstances and how resilient children are and all of that, in most cases, we will will de-escalate, if you will, reduce levels of anxiety or concern from the parents, and that will also help the children because typically speaking, the parent-children interaction is frequent, and when there's anxiety in one domain, it usually will spill over the other way as well.
Thank you. That was very, very perfectly timed to the next page. Okay. So we need to teach physical signs. Teachers can teach students to notice what it feels like. Okay. We need to make sure, and I've seen even teachers of 3-year-olds do this, teachers of 5-year-olds do this, and teachers of 7, 8, and 10-year-olds do this. I've seen classes in high school just quickly discuss these things. Children need to know what it's like to have an emotional thermometer. They need to be able to say, excuse me, can I go to the bathroom? And be able to wash their faces with water and come right back. It's really important for children to know before it gets out of control that they're feeling unstable and they need to calm down. And it's very helpful if we're able to teach that to them. I have gone over to children in my classroom and say, on 1 to 5, how you doing? And she already knew what that meant. And she was able to tell me 0. And I'm like, okay, go run up and down the steps, go to the bathroom, take a drink, and come back in. And I'll be ready to tell you what this test is all about. Don't worry. So we need to give that to children, that ability to be a little more flexible and react to their reactions rather than shut them down and not help them. A very disturbing situation that happened 3 years ago. It was a high school classroom and everybody was sitting and taking a proctored exam. Okay, so let's just say that the proctor was not really a professional teacher, but the proctor was walking around, checking everybody was taking the test and not cheating, and then went back to the desk and sat down. And there was a child. I don't know if you remember taking tests, but you get into a little bubble where you're the only one in the room because it's you and that test paper. And she just shut her eyes, felt herself starting to blow up, opened her eyes, threw the test on the floor, threw the pencil, said, I can't do this, I'm so stupid. And then looked around and realized she was in a big classroom full of other students, full of people that she considered friends and peers, and she was so embarrassed. But the proctor was not ready for this and screamed, get out of my class. Now, that's not helpful. We need to make sure that if we're aware and we teach the physical signs, then we give them an out. We say, oh, you seem to be struggling. Go get a drink, come back in, and I'll set you up for the next test, or I'll set you up for the next question. We don't have to kick kids out for misbehavior that really isn't misbehavior, but it's really a reaction to how they're feeling. Everybody needs to recognize their warning signs. Little kids can recognize a tummy or head hurting or face getting red. And big kids can recognize nuanced feelings. They can actually understand what it is that they're feeling. And then, of course, we need to teach children to recognize other people's warning signs. If someone's getting red-faced, they shouldn't continue talking to them. If they're saying something and they didn't realize they're embarrassing someone, they need to recognize what it looks like when someone's getting embarrassed. We need to show them how to cool the flame, how to apologize for it, even if they didn't mean to do it, it just cools the flame. We need to show them large and small stretches. I always, when I go into classes and I model, I'm always helping children to stop, put down their pencils, and do some finger exercises. In the box up on the corner, I'm showing you right now. I have the kids do finger exercises. We even do different silly things just to make them a little less stressed after 5 questions, and then they go back and continue doing more questions. It's important to have a safe place. In the college I teach, they borrow at public school, and we teach after hours. And the classroom I'm in actually has a corner of the classroom, which is a safe place where children who need to can go there and continue working, or go there and read a book and come back to class whenever they're ready. And of course, they leave class, so it's really helpful. Deal with physical signs. So we have to really make sure that we help the children move from their limbic system reaction back to the prefrontal cortex. So teaching them repetitive movements, stretching, changing positions. I mean, you and I do that. I'll get a workshop and I don't want to sit anymore. I'll stand in the back room and continue listening. And we don't always give kids that option. Distraction. So a really helpful thing, like I told you, my own personal thing is to read something. I wish I could give credit to where credit is due, but years and years ago, I took a workshop with a psychologist, and it was brilliant. He gave out something called now I'm forgetting what it was called. But it was a form that the kids have to figure out. They have to write down name, when did the occurrence happen, how did I feel, and it was a whole bunch of questions. But the nice part is it was just circling answers. And I remember using this in a classroom, and one child wrote for was my reaction, how was my reaction? And it says great, good, not so good, and terrible. And the child circled great and then wrote I wish. And that showed me that that child was moving from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex and was ready to figure out what happened and make it better, because the child was thinking, and thinking says we're no longer in that place of anxiety and inability of fight and flight. So how can we manage it? First of all, let's make it a safe place. I know safe place is used for bullying and all this other stuff, but let's talk about safe in terms of anxiety. Let's be clear. Give directions a few different ways. I just found a text from Naftali saying that my audio is choppy. I apologize. Hopefully I'm saying things again and again that is helpful. I don't have any indication on my side that there's any problems, and so there's nothing I could fix. So give directions a few different ways, say things a few different times, and be consistent and make sense. Don't collect homework the first thing one day, the middle of the class another day, and at the end another day, unless that's what you set up. And think learning moments. Don't think punishment. If you're thinking punishment, you're kind of coming from an angry place yourself. But if you're thinking learning moments, you're in that prefrontal cortex yourself, and you're trying to figure out how to help the child. So that's a really important thing. It's making sure that what you say matches what they did. It's like, oh, you spilled that? No problem. At recess, please get paper towels and clean it up. But if you're reacting by punishing, it's like, you spilled that? Get out of my class. So you just have different reactions when you're thinking learning moments and you're thinking punishment. And then children learn not to be anxious in your classroom. Think bad day, not bad kid. I don't know, folks. I have bad days, and I would hate to be judged on that. So I don't want to think that we have different standards for ourselves and for others. If a child's having a bad day, so they're having a bad day. The question you have to ask yourself is it a bad day, or is it a bad week, Or has it been a bad month? We deal with things differently. But if it's a bad day, maybe that child needs to be the monitor. Maybe that child needs to go to the office and help deliver something. Maybe that child just needs a little bit of extra TLC, or maybe needs to be left alone. So, depending on the age of the child, I've asked children, I've gone over and said, wow, you seem to be uptight. You want to be left alone? You want to go out a little bit? How can I help you? And I pick times where the class is busy, so no one knows I'm talking to the child, and the child feels heard and cared for. And think consequences, not punishment. It's so interesting. I was once giving a workshop in a school, and I was fascinated because all the desks were turned around. And I was confused because the opening of the desk was now on the other side. So how do children interact with their things? And I was told that the teacher left the desk all the time that way, and that way children never played with the stuff in their desks. And I went back to my classroom and I said, you know what? How about if we have this, we adopt this method. Whenever you find yourself distracted, I'm going to ask you to turn your desk around. And isn't that great? And then you won't be bothered by all the things you're distracted with. And the kids love the idea. And the next time I saw someone distracted, I said, oh, you want to turn your desk around? And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I think it would help. And they turned their desk around. And after a while, it just became what we did when kids were distracted and helped them. They were able to focus. One day, I heard a scrape and I turned around, and a child was turning around her own desk without being asked because she had learned that that was helpful for her. Unfortunately, I was in another school and they had adopted the same thing I adopted, but differently. I was sitting in the classroom in the back, taking notes of how to help the teacher. And all of a sudden, the teacher turned to a student and said, that's it. Turn your desk around. You may not have your desk facing the proper way. And the child was crying. And I was just, I couldn't believe it. Like, I wouldn't even dream of making that into a punishment, because in my class it worked so well as a consequence that could be turned back around as soon as the child felt ready. And that's our job, giving children ways of getting out of something, unstuck, so that they can join back at the right time and the right place when they're ready. We want to set up class for success. We want to make sure that no children go to the bathroom while we're teaching, and only go out or go to the office to pick something up or go get homework for a sibling. We only let them go out when there's individual work. And it sounds like such a silly thing, but I can't tell you how many classrooms I'm able to solve so many issues just by telling the teacher to have children not go out by instruction. Okay, confusion causes misbehavior, misbehavior causes anger and distrust and yelling and problems, and that leads to anxiety. Absent children, let's call them. Just like we just heard from Kim that is calling everybody. We teachers should really make it our business to call a few people every day, check up on them, and when we're back in school, if a child's absent, put their name and number on the board, let them get phone calls. You feel missed, special. Prepare for recess and unstructured time. Research shows that the worst time for children are, and if I had chat open, I'd be able to have you write, and I'm sure you would answer, recess, lunch, and on the bus. So we need to make sure that we give children ways of being structured. We teach social skills, discuss relevance. We need to give them the tools to be able to manage those situations. And we need to follow through anything being taught. You can't say something once. You got to make sure that you keep going back to it and keep repeating it. I like to go ahead and bring up all the social skills on Mondays, and then before recess, repeat them and ask different children to share which ones they think they're going to work on. And I just find we do it in a different way, but we do it in all the grades.
Etti, if
If
I
there's
may
no,
jump in for a moment. First of all, you're
please.
welcome to go ahead and to ask people to respond to something, and minimally I will read it if you can't see it. I also wanted to let
Okay.
everybody know that I use this when I do a growth mindset presentation, but it's very relevant to what Etti was talking about on the previous slide. Lessons from spilled milk. I actually included the entire document in, I think it was 3 different chat posts. I couldn't get it all into one because of text limitations, but if you scroll through your chat feed, you will see the actual story of the doctor who, as a child, had spilled milk, and instead of yelling at him, the mother instead turned it into a great learning experience and a practice opportunity and a variety of other things. So a lot of this, I think, is about just reorienting our mindset. It kind of reminds me a bit about metacognition, just thinking about how we think, thinking about how we respond, thinking about the emotions that we're feeling and what we're doing. And the more proactive, I think one of the great things about what Etti is talking about is that she's giving us a model to teach and a model to practice in a proactive way as much as reactive. So a lot of the issues can be avoided from the outset because we have a better capacity to frame the environment and the culture. And then when things do happen, we have words and processes already in place. So we don't have to have a knee jerk sort of immediate reaction. We can be much more careful in what it is.
Thank you. So well said. Sometimes it's anxiety because the children tell their parents there's no homework, and the parents say, I don't believe you. So as a teacher, again, we could be proactive and write no writing homework in class. I do no writing homework in classes preparation. We can have no homework written in our homework. We want to make sure it's clear. We want to make sure we're not sending home anything that the children have to teach themselves or parents have to teach them, because that's not fair. We're finding a lot of parents right now who are anxious and stressed out because they don't know the material. If they wanted to be in education, they might have chosen to be in education. And now we've made every parent a teacher. Also, model, model, model. One day I ran out of some paper and I just ran into my friend's class and I just barged in and said, quick, give any paper for me? And as I left the classroom, I said to myself, oh my gosh, I tell the children to knock on the door. I tell them to wait until someone answers the door. And I just modeled wrong behavior. So we have to be mindful that even if we only have 2 seconds, maybe just make sure you have enough paper. But if you have to go to a friend's classroom, knock on the door, wait to be called on, and then go and say, excuse me, I was wondering, I'm sorry to bother you. I was wondering if you had any paper. Because we're in front of the kids and they learn a lot from what they see and more than what we say. Okay? And praise precisely. Before we wrap up, we need to understand that the way that we can really, really minimize anxiety is to remember that children don't know what we want from them a lot of the time. So we want to make sure that we follow the growth mindset model and we praise precisely. We want to make sure that if we like something, we say exactly what we like. We say, Sharon, you're really working on your handwriting. Karen, thank you for giving me the paper so quickly. The whole class heard that you actually care about proper handwriting and that you were very impressed with Karen when she gave things in right away. And so they have ideas now from your precise praise. What is exactly the value system that you're asking for? And for those of you who are worried about children who've been home and children who don't know what you're going to want from them and behaviors, keep in mind that if you're clear and they know what you want from them, they will respond accordingly. Quick crazy story. I give a shout out to my sister-in-law about this. I was telling my brother, who is such a nice guy, that he's just very big with his praise. He's like, you're such a great sister. You're such a great wife. He's always just throwing these things out. And he means it, by the way. And I had been talking about praising precisely. And my sister-in-law said, thank you. When my husband says, oh, you're such a great wife, the first thing I think of is, oh my gosh, I forgot some of the orange juice that he likes. And I didn't answer that phone call he asked me to make, because that's what we do. We right away get down on ourselves because we're worried that the person doesn't really know us. And instead, when a person says, wow, my brother might say, wow, that was a great supper. My sister-in-law says, oh, I think so too. And it works the same way. It doesn't have to be wife to husband, husband to wife. It works the same way as Carol Dweck tells us, from teacher to students, from parent to student, from parent to parent, from anybody to anybody. When we praise precisely, we relieve anxiety because people know what you want from them. And there's less anxiety when they know what you're asking for, how they can achieve. And I'm going to end with a quick story. In Growth Mindset, Carol Dweck talks about the fact that she did this experiment with the same grade. I think it was 4th grade. She did it all over and over and over again. And every time it was the exact same results. She put some children in one room, some children in another room, and some children in the third room. In the first room, she gave them some math sheets to do, and she kept saying, oh, you guys are so smart. In the second group, she said, wow, look at the effort you put in. And the third group was the control group, so we don't care what she said or what she didn't say anything. She just checked up on them. Every single place that she did this experiment, the first group that she said, you are so smart, they refused to get another math sheet. Even though they did it well, they said, okay, we're done. every single group that she did this with, the second group that was told, you work so hard, you show such effort, was willing to do another math sheet and another math sheet. They were willing to keep trying hard things because the value was effort and the value was not vague. And of course, the control group was just there to make sure that we were dealing with the right age kids. So when we just vaguely say, you're so smart, kids don't know what you want from them. So they're like, I don't know how I got here, so let me just stay here. She thinks I'm smart, I'm staying smart. But if I hear that effort is valued, then I don't mind trying and I don't mind doing whatever I have to do. So the question is, well, I'm going to go back to the other slide for a second. Did we prevent most anxiety in the classroom by being proactive instead of reactive? Do we know more skills now? I hope so. I hope that you do feel that way. And can we teach students to recognize their own stress level? I hope so. I hope you feel that way. So if you would like to hear more from me or for a copy of this PowerPoint, please contact me. I understand that Impactful Coaching is going to send you a recording of this webinar today. And I really thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to be looking and checking on the chats to see if there's anything I can answer and I can discuss.
Okay, Etti, I'm going to jump
And
in
the
at this
only,
point. I don't know. Did you want to say something additional?
no, I wanted to actually go out of the stop share and I wanted to see the chats.
Oh,
Is there
okay.
anything I
So
should respond to?
if you're able to make me the host again, I think you probably can. See if you could figure out how to do that. That would be great. But in the meantime, I hope everybody can hear me. First of all, you're getting a lot of thank yous. So everybody who appreciated what Etti shared, please go ahead and share your comments and hopefully she will see it. Udelka and anyone else who's still replying, all panelists, please make sure you reply all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see. And I just wanted to share some links with you that I just put in the chat before, but I put it in again. A couple of things that we've been doing here that are worthwhile. First of all, anything related to the educational services that I offer with Impactful Coaching, please do go to impactfulcoaching.com/education. You have a link to a certificate. If you're interested in a certificate for attending today's session, we have DIY certificates on my website. I've been asking folks who are school leaders or teachers, anyone interested potentially in joining a mastermind, please go ahead and use the links that I shared with you. A number of you have already replied, which is great. And that also gives me insight as to whether or not I should be following up with you. Absolutely no pressure there. As far as new webinars for next week, that is also up on my website. I've got one additional one on productivity, which we did the first one yesterday. And then the next one is going to be on memory and retention. That's our focus for educators in particular, and that is next week on Thursday. You should be getting emails with more information about that. I included this link previously, including it again, stress management ebook, since we're talking a lot about anxiety. It's a great free resource that you could download. And many of you have been asking me about how to access the recordings after the session. So you do all get emails, and I hope that you are able to open them. But separate, I would encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel because everything is uploaded into YouTube, so you could get it on a continuous basis. In many cases, because of limitations of storage, I cannot keep everything on the cloud with Zoom forever. I do need to clear things out so I can put new content in, but they will live on in YouTube. So therefore, if you go there and you subscribe, you will get the information. Etti, are you able at this point to see the chat? It looks like you replied, so it looks like you're able to see it.
Yes, and I'm posting up some things that will help parents with their children
Okay,
and teachers using Zoom will be
great.
able to also use these in their classroom.
So folks, go ahead and scroll up real quick, grab whatever links are relevant to you. I know we just shared about 3,000. And so you have to decide which ones you want to grab before we close out the presentation today. If possible, maybe Etti and I will put together a link of, a list of links. And then in that email, I can go ahead and include additional links for you that you could then access and utilize on your time. So at this point, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Etti for everything that she did, and we're going to wrap it up over here. So thank you again, and wishing everybody a fantastic day, a great weekend. You should all stay in good health. Thank you for being part of this incredible community that we are creating. And again, reach out to Etti if you have any other questions, or specifically if you'd like to use her in any of her professional services. If you think she was good on a webinar, you can only imagine how she is in person. So we're signing
Thank
off
you.
now. Thank you. And all of you have a great day. We'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye now.